Welcome back to the American Presidency Unfiltered, where we dig into the quirks, tempers, and eyebrow-raising stories of America's commanders-in-chief. I'm your host, Brad Pitzl. Today's episode takes us to one of the most peculiar moments in presidential history, the day Harry Truman threatened to punch a music critic. Yes, the President of the United States, fresh off guiding the nation through a world war, and in the thick of the Cold War, took time to defend his daughter's piano recital with a letter that sounded more like a barroom warning than White House correspondence. Let's explore the letter, Truman's famous temper, the public reaction, and how Truman and the critic eventually made peace. Today's episode is brought to you by politicaltradingcards.com. Grab a piece of history with the latest trading cards from the left and the right. politicaltradingcards.com. In December 1950, Margaret Truman, Harry's only daughter, gave a recital at Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C. She was already well known, and reviews of her performances often made headlines. The Washington Post music critic, Paul Hume, wrote a review that was blunt, perhaps too blunt for a protective father's taste. He said Margaret cannot sing very well, that she was flat a good deal of the time, and that she had not achieved a professional level. Harry Truman didn't take that well. The President of the United States sat down with White House stationery and fired back. His letter to Hume described him as an 8-ulcer man on 4-ulcer pay, accused him of being a frustrated old man, and promised that someday he would need a new nose and a lot of beefsteak for his black eyes. Truman finished with a flourish, reminding Hume that presidents could still apparently hand out bruises. It was classic Truman, blunt, unfiltered, and completely unconcerned with how the letter might look when the press got a hold of it. Truman's presidency was already defined by his candor. His slogan in 1948 had been, "Give 'em hell, Harry," a phrase born out of his sharp campaign speeches. In public, he often used plain talk to reassure people during parts of the Cold War. He cultivated an image of steadiness, directness, but statesmanlike. Privately, though, Truman's temper was legendary. He had a lifelong habit of writing angry letters when frustrated. Most never left his desk. His staff knew better than to let them out. But this one slipped through, and it showed the world of a president who could turn from Cold War strategist to protective father in an instant. The contrast was striking. In press conferences, he was measured and calm, while in private correspondence, he could threaten to rearrange a music critic's face. It gave Americans a glimpse of the man behind the office, fiery, human, and not above a little fatherly overreaction. Truman's reaction didn't come in a vacuum. Just 2 years earlier, in 1948, he had pulled off one of the greatest electoral upsets in American history. The Chicago Tribune famously printed its "Dewey defeats Truman" headline, only for Truman to hold it up in triumph after winning. That victory gave him a reputation as a fighter, someone who could beat the odds through determination and grit. So when news of a furious letter leaked, the country was divided. Some critics said it was beneath the dignity of the presidency, proof of Truman's infamous temper. But others found it refreshing. After all, here was a president willing to defend his daughter with the same intensity that he defended the free world. To Americans, it made him more relatable, especially at a time when people still admired plain-spoken, honest leaders. It was a strange moment of political theater. The president's temper became a public talking point, but it didn't hurt his image as much as you might expect. If anything, it reminded people that Truman was never afraid to fight, whether against political opponents, world dictators, or in this case, a music critic. The story doesn't end with Truman swinging punches. Years later, Truman and Paul Hume actually made amends. They met after Truman left the White House at the Truman Presidential Library in Independence, Missouri. Rather than trading blows, they shook hands, talked about music, and even sat side by side at a concert. Hume himself, surprisingly gracious, he later said that a man burdened with the global crises and personal loss ought to be forgiven for an occasional outburst. Margaret Truman, meanwhile, laughed off the whole affair. She joked that the controversy might have helped her career by drawing more attention to her performances. What could have been a lingering feud turned into a curious footnote, and perhaps even a reminder that the sharpest words can eventually mellow into mutual respect. So what can we learn from Truman's letter to Paul Hume? First, presidents are people. Truman was not acting as commander-in-chief in that moment. He was acting as a dad, stung by harsh words aimed at his daughter. His instincts were human, even though his words were a little over the top. Second, it highlights the balance between public and private personas. Truman could project calm authority in the Oval Office while firing off fiery notes in private. Both sides were real, and both shaped how history remembers him. And finally, it shows the value of reconciliation. Truman and Hume proved that even sharp words and a threatened punch or two don't have to define a relationship forever. They ended on friendly terms, reminding us that even leaders with hot tempers can grow beyond the heat of the moment. That's it for today's episode of the American Presidency Unfiltered. We've seen how Harry Truman, the plain-spoken president, turned into a fiercely protective father, and how a threatening letter turned into an unlikely friendship. It's a story that reminds us our leaders are flawed, fiery, and forgiving like the rest of us. I'm Brad Pitzl. Thanks for listening. Until next time, stay curious and watch what you say about someone's daughter's musical ability.